Deposit your money in a forest rather than with a notary. The reader has, no doubt, understood, without necessitating a lengthy explanation, that Jean Valjean, after the Champ Mathieu affair, had been able, thanks to his first escape of a few days' duration, to come to Paris and to withdraw in season, from the hands of Laffitte, the sum earned by him, under the name of Monsieur Madeleine, at Montreuil-sur-Mer. And that fearing that he might be recaptured, which eventually happened, he had buried and hidden that sum in the forest of Montfermeil, in the locality known as the Blairy Bottom. The sum, 630,000 francs, all in bank bills, was not very bulky, and was contained in a box. Only, in order to preserve the box from dampness, he had placed it in a coffer filled with chestnut shavings. In the same coffer he had placed his other treasures, the bishop's candlesticks. It will be remembered that he had carried off the candlesticks when he made his escape from Montreuil-sur-Mer. The man seen one evening for the first time by Boulatruelle, was Jean Valjean. Later on, every time that Jean Valjean needed money, he went to get it in the Blairy Bottom. Hence the absences which we have mentioned. He had a pickaxe somewhere in the heather, in a hiding place known to himself alone. When he beheld Marius convalescent, feeling that the hour was at hand, when that money might prove of service, he had gone to get it. It was he again, whom Boulatruelle had seen in the woods, but on this occasion, in the morning instead of in the evening. Boulatruelle inherited his pickaxe. The actual sum was 584,500 francs. Jean Valjean withdrew the 500 francs for himself. We shall see hereafter, he thought. The difference between that sum and the 630,000 francs withdrawn from Laffitte represented his expenditure in 10 years, from 1823 to 1833. The 5 years of his stay in the convent had cost only 5,000 francs. Jean Valjean set the 2 candlesticks on the chimney-piece, where they glittered to the great admiration of Toussaint. Moreover, Jean Valjean knew that he was delivered from Javert. The story had been told in his presence. And he had verified the fact in the Moniteur. How a police inspector named Javert had been found drowned under a boat belonging to some laundresses. Between the Pont au Change and the Pont Neuf, and that a writing left by this man, otherwise irreproachable and highly esteemed by his superiors, pointed to a fit of mental aberration and a suicide. In fact, thought Jean Valjean, since he left me at liberty, once having got me in his power, he must have been already mad. Chapter 6. The 2 old men do everything, each one after his own fashion, to render Cosette happy. Everything was made ready for the wedding. The doctor, on being consulted, declared that it might take place in February. It was then December. A few ravishing weeks of perfect happiness passed. The grandfather was not the least happy of them all. He remained for a quarter of an hour at a time gazing at Cosette. "The wonderful, beautiful girl!" he exclaimed. "And she has so sweet and good an air. She is, without exception, the most charming girl that I have ever seen in my life. Later on, she'll have virtues with an odor of violets. How graceful! One cannot live otherwise than nobly with such a creature. Marius, my boy, you are a baron, you are rich, don't go to pettifogging, I beg of you." Cosette and Marius had passed abruptly from the sepulchre to paradise. The transition had not been softened, and they would have been stunned, had they not been dazzled by it. "Do you understand anything about it?" said Marius to Cosette. "No," replied Cosette, "but it seems to me that the good God is caring for us." Jean Valjean did everything, smoothed away every difficulty, arranged everything, made everything easy. He hastened towards Cosette's happiness with as much ardor, and, apparently with as much joy, as Cosette herself. As he had been a mayor, he understood how to solve that delicate problem, with the secret of which he alone was acquainted, Cosette's civil status. If he were to announce her origin bluntly, it might prevent the marriage, who knows? He extricated Cosette from all difficulties. He concocted for her a family of dead people, a sure means of not encountering any objections. Cosette was the only scion of an extinct family. Cosette was not his own daughter, but the daughter of the other Fauchelevent. Two brothers Fauchelevent had been gardeners to the convent of the Petit Picpus. Inquiry was made at that convent. The very best information and the most respectable references abounded. The good nuns, not very apt and but little inclined to fathom questions of paternity, and not attaching any importance to the matter, had never understood exactly of which of the two Fauchelevents Cosette was the daughter. They said what was wanted and they said it with zeal. An acte de notariate was drawn up. Cosette became in the eyes of the law, Mademoiselle Euphrasie Fauchelevent. She was declared an orphan, both father and mother being dead. Jean Valjean so arranged it that he was appointed, under the name of Fauchelevent, as Cosette's guardian, with M. Guillener as supervising guardian over him. As for the 580,000 francs, they constituted a legacy bequeathed to Cosette by a dead person, who desired to remain unknown. The original legacy had consisted of 594,000 francs. But 10,000 francs had been expended on the education of Mademoiselle Euphrasie, 5,000 francs of that amount having been paid to the convent. This legacy, deposited in the hands of a third party, was to be turned over to Cosette at her majority, or at the date of her marriage. This, taken as a whole, was very acceptable, as the reader will perceive, especially when the sum due was 500,000. There were some peculiarities here and there, it is true, but they were not noticed. One of the interested parties had his eyes blindfolded by love, the others by the 600,000 francs. Cosette learned that she was not the daughter of that old man whom she had so long called father. He was merely a kinsman. Another Fauchelevent was her real father. At any other time this would have broken her heart. But at the ineffable moment which she was then passing through, it cast but a slight shadow, a faint cloud, and she was so full of joy that the cloud did not last long. She had Marius. The young man arrived, the old man was effaced. Such is life. And then, Cosette had, for long years, been habituated to seeing enigmas around her. Every being who has had a mysterious childhood is always prepared for certain renunciations. Nevertheless, she continued to call Jean Valjean Father. Cosette, happy as the angels, was enthusiastic over Father Guillener. It is true that he overwhelmed her with gallant compliments and presents. While Jean Valjean was building up for Cosette a normal situation in society and an unassailable status, M. Guillener was superintending the basket of wedding gifts. Nothing so amused him as being magnificent. He had given to Cosette a robe of binche guipure which had descended to him from his own grandmother. "These fashions come up again," said he, "ancient things are the rage, and the young women of my old age dress like the old women of my childhood." He rifled his respectable chests of drawers in Coromandel lacquer, with swelling fronts, which had not been opened for years. "Let us hear the confession of these dowagers," he said, "let us see what they have in their ponches." He noisily violated the pot-bellied drawers of all his wives, of all his mistresses and of all his grandmothers. Pecans, damasks, lampas, painted moires, robes of shot gros de tours, India kerchiefs embroidered in gold that could be washed, dauphins without a right or wrong side. In the piece, Genoa and Alençon point lace, parures in antique goldsmith's work, ivory bonbon boxes ornamented with microscopic battles, gewgaws, and ribbons, he lavished everything on Cosette. Cosette, amazed, desperately in love with Marius, and wild with gratitude towards M. Guillener, dreamed of a happiness without limit clothed in satin and velvet. Her wedding basket seemed to her to be upheld by seraphim. Her soul flew out into the azure depths, with wings of Mechlin lace. The intoxication of the lovers was only equalled, as we have already said, by the ecstasy of the grandfather. A sort of flourish of trumpets went on in the Rue de Fils du Calvaire. Every morning, a fresh offering of bric-a-brac from the grandfather to Cosette. All possible knickknacks glittered around her. One day Marius, who was fond of talking gravely in the midst of his bliss, said, apropos of I know not what incident. The men of the revolution are so great, that they have the prestige of the ages, like Cato and like Phocion, and each one of them seems to me an antique memory. Moire antique! Exclaimed the old gentleman. Thanks, Marius. That is precisely the idea of which I was in search. And on the following day, a magnificent dress of rose-colored moire antique was added to Cosette's wedding presents. From these fripperies, the grandfather extracted a bit of wisdom. Love is all very well. But there must be something else to go with it. The useless must be mingled with happiness. Happiness is only the necessary. Season that enormously with the superfluous for me. A palace in her heart. Her heart in the Louvre. Her heart in the grand waterworks of Versailles. Give me my shepherdess and try to make her a duchess. Fetch me Phyllis crowned with cornflowers, and add 100,000 francs income. Open for me a bucolic perspective as far as you can see, beneath a marble colonnade. I consent to the bucolic and also to the fairy spectacle of marble and gold. Dry happiness resembles dry bread. One eats, but one does not dine. I want the superfluous, the useless, the extravagant, excess, that which serves no purpose. I remember to have seen, in the Cathedral of Strasbourg, a clock, as tall as a 3-story house which marked the hours, which had the kindness to indicate the hour, but which had not the air of being made for that. And which, after having struck midday, or midnight, midday, the hour of the sun, or midnight, the hour of love, or any other hour that you like, gave you the moon and the stars, the earth and the sea, birds and fishes, Phoebus and Phoebe, and a host of things which emerged from a niche, and the 12 apostles, and the Emperor Charles V, and Eponine, and Sabinus, and a throng of little gilded goodmen, who played on the trumpet to boot. Without reckoning delicious chimes which it sprinkled through the air, on every occasion, without anyone's knowing why. Is a petty bald clock face which merely tells the hour equal to that? For my part, I am of the opinion of the big clock of Strasbourg, and I prefer it to the cuckoo clock from the Black Forest. M. Gilliner Mand talked nonsense in connection with the wedding, and all the fripperies of the 18th century passed pell-mell through his dithyrambs. You are ignorant of the art of festivals. You do not know how to organize a day of enjoyment in this age, he exclaimed. Your 19th century is weak. It lacks excess. It ignores the rich, it ignores the noble. In everything it is clean-shaven. Your third estate is insipid, colorless, odorless, and shapeless. The dreams of your bourgeois who set up, as they express it, a pretty boudoir freshly decorated, violet, ebony and calico. Make way! Make way! The Sieur Curmudgeon is marrying Mademoiselle Clutchpenny. Sumptuousness and splendor. A Louis d'or has been stuck to a candle. There's the epoch for you. My demand is that I may flee from it beyond the Sarmatians. Ah! In 1787. I predict that all was lost. From the day when I beheld the Duc de Rohan, Prince de Leon, Duc de Chabot, Duc de Montbazon, Marquis de Soubise, Vicomte de Thouars, peer of France, go to Longchamps in a tape coup. That has borne its fruits. In this century, men attend to business, they gamble on change, they win money, they are stingy. People take care of their surfaces and varnish them. Everyone is dressed as though just out of a bandbox. Washed, soaped, scraped, shaved, combed, waked, smoothed, rubbed, brushed, cleaned on the outside, irreproachable, polished as a pebble, discreet, neat, and at the same time, death of my life, in the depths of their consciences they have dung heaps and cesspools that are enough to make a cowherd who blows his nose in his fingers, recoil. I grant to this age the device. Dirty cleanliness. Don't be vexed, Marius, give me permission to speak. I say no evil of the people as you see, I am always harping on your people, but do look favorably on my dealing a bit of a slap to the bourgeoisie. I belong to it. He who loves well lashes well. Thereupon, I say plainly, that nowadays people marry, but that they no longer know how to marry. Ah! It is true, I regret the grace of the ancient manners. I regret everything about them. Their elegance. Their chivalry. Those courteous and delicate ways. That joyous luxury which everyone possessed. Music forming part of the wedding. A symphony above stairs. A beating of drums below stairs. The dances, the joyous faces round the table, the fine-spun gallant compliments, the songs, the fireworks, the frank laughter, the devil's own row, the huge knots of ribbon. I regret the bride's garter. The bride's garter is cousin to the girdle of Venus. On what does the war of Troy turn? On Helen's garter, parbleu! Why did they fight? Why did Diomed the divine break over the head of Marians that great brazen helmet of 10 points? Why did Achilles and Hector hew each other up with vast blows of their lances? Because Helen allowed Paris to take her garter. With Cosette's garter, Homer would construct the Iliad. He would put in his poem, a loquacious old fellow, like me, and he would call him Nestor. My friends, in bygone days, in those amiable days of yore, people married wisely. They had a good contract, and then they had a good carouse. As soon as Cujas had taken his departure, Gamico entered. But, in sooth, the stomach is an agreeable beast which demands its due, and which wants to have its wedding also. People supped well, and had at table a beautiful neighbour without a gamp so that her throat was only moderately concealed. Oh! The large laughing mouths, and how gay we were in those days! Youth was a bouquet. Every young man terminated in a branch of lilacs or a tuft of roses. Whether he was a shepherd or a warrior. And if, by chance, one was a captain of dragoons, one found means to call oneself Florian. People thought much of looking well. They embroidered and tinted themselves. A bourgeois had the air of a flower, a marquis had the air of a precious stone. People had no straps to their boots, they had no boots. They were spruce, shining, waved, lustrous, fluttering, dainty, coquettish, which did not at all prevent their wearing swords by their sides. The hummingbird has beak and claws. That was the day of the gallant Indies. One of the sides of that century was delicate, the other was magnificent. And by the green cabbages, people amused themselves. Today, people are serious. The bourgeois is avaricious, the bourgeoise is a prude. Your century is unfortunate. People would drive away the graces as being too low in the neck. Alas! Beauty is concealed as though it were ugliness. Since the Revolution, everything, including the ballet dancers, has had its trousers. A mountebank dancer must be grave. Your rigadoons are doctrinarian. It is necessary to be majestic. People would be greatly annoyed if they did not carry their chins in their cravats. The ideal of an urchin of 20 when he marries, is to resemble M. Royer Collard. And do you know what one arrives at with that majesty? At being petty. Learn this. Joy is not only joyous. It is great. But be in love gaily then, what the deuce? Marry, when you marry, with fever and giddiness and tumult and the uproar of happiness. Be grave in church, well and good. But, as soon as the mass is finished, sarpejou. You must make a dream whirl around the bride. A marriage should be royal and chimerical. It should promenade its ceremony from the Cathedral of Reims to the Pagoda of Chanteloup. I have a horror of a paltry wedding. Ventrigoulette. Be in Olympus for that one day, at least. Be one of the gods. Ah! People might be sylphs. Games and laughter, argyrospides. They are stupids. My friends, every recently made bridegroom ought to be Prince Aldobrandini. Profit by that unique minute in life to soar away to the empyrean with the swans and the eagles, even if you do have to fall back on the morrow into the bourgeoisie of the frogs. Don't economize on the nuptials, do not prune them of their splendors. Don't scrimp on the day when you beam. The wedding is not the housekeeping. Oh! If I were to carry out my fancy, it would be gallant, violins would be heard under the trees. Here is my program. Sky blue and silver. I would mingle with the festival the rural divinities, I would convoke the dryads and the nereids. The nuptials of Amphitrite, a rosy cloud, nymphs with well-dressed locks and entirely naked, an academician offering quatrains to the goddess, a chariot drawn by marine monsters. Triton trottate devant, et tyrite de sa conque. De suns si ravis sans chu il ravis si et quiconque. 65. There's a festive program, there's a good one, or else I know nothing of such matters, deuce take it. While the grandfather, in full lyrical effusion, was listening to himself, Cosette and Marius grew intoxicated as they gazed freely at each other. Aunt Gillenormand surveyed all this with her imperturbable placidity. Within the last 5 or 6 months she had experienced a certain amount of emotions. Marius returned. Marius brought back bleeding, Marius brought back from a barricade, Marius dead, then living, Marius reconciled, Marius betrothed, Marius wedding a poor girl, Marius wedding a millionairess. The 600,000 francs had been her last surprise. Then, her indifference of a girl taking her first communion returned to her. She went regularly to service. Told her beads, read her euchology, mumbled aves in one corner of the house, while I love you was being whispered in the other, and she beheld Marius and Cosette in a vague way, like two shadows. The shadow was herself. There is a certain state of inert asceticism in which the soul, neutralized by torpor, a stranger to that which may be designated as the business of living, receives no impressions, either human, or pleasant or painful, with the exception of earthquakes and catastrophes. This devotion, as Father Gillenormand said to his daughter, corresponds to a cold in the head. You smell nothing of life. Neither any bad, nor any good odor. Moreover, the 600,000 francs had settled the elderly spinster's indecision. Her father had acquired the habit of taking her so little into account, that he had not consulted her in the matter of consent to Marius' marriage. He had acted impetuously, according to his wont, having, a despot turned slave, but a single thought, to satisfy Marius. As for the aunt, it had not even occurred to him that the aunt existed, and that she could have an opinion of her own, and, sheep as she was, this had vexed her. Somewhat resentful in her inmost soul, but impassible externally, she had said to herself, "My father has settled the question of the marriage without reference to me. I shall settle the question of the inheritance without consulting him." She was rich, in fact, and her father was not. She had reserved her decision on this point. It is probable that, had the match been a poor one, she would have left him poor. So much the worse for my nephew. He is wedding a beggar, let him be a beggar himself. But Cosette's 500,000 pleased the aunt, and altered her inward situation so far as this pair of lovers were concerned. One owes some consideration to 600,000 francs, and it was evident that she could not do otherwise than leave her fortune to these young people, since they did not need it. It was arranged that the couple should live with the grandfather, M. Gillenormand insisted on resigning to them his chamber, the finest in the house. "That will make me young again," he said. "It's an old plan of mine. I have always entertained the idea of having a wedding in my chamber." He furnished this chamber with a multitude of elegant trifles. He had the ceiling and walls hung with an extraordinary stuff, which he had by him in the piece, and which he believed to have emanated from Utrecht, with a buttercup-coloured satin ground, covered with velvet auricula blossoms. "It was with that stuff," said he, "that the bed of the Duchesse d'Anville at La Roche-Guyon was draped." On the chimney-piece, he set a little figure in Saxe porcelain, carrying a muff against her nude stomach. M. Gillenormand's library became the lawyer's study, which Marius needed, a study, it will be remembered, being required by the Council of the Order.